Okay, so this is going to be my video where I essentially document my journey from going from a 15-second 100 meter runner to an under 11-second 10.9 100 meter runner. During this time as well, I went from, not being able to dunk to being able to dunk at 5'5". You'll kind of see a video of me trying to dunk on 8'6", and that's kind of where my whole sort of like journey with becoming a better athlete really started, was training to dunk basketball. At the time I started, I was 16 and about 5'2.5", maybe 5'3" at the most, and I kind of just got inspired after I saw Jordan Kilgannon hit this like lost and found dunk. I then saw a bunch of like short guys dunking after like 6 months of training, short guys going for dunk attempts, and it just kind of like inspired me to go on my own journey to try and dunk. And admittedly, I thought I was going to be able to dunk by the time I was like 18, but it took a lot longer. I feel like I could have gotten a lot better sooner had I trained better, had I if I'd had a better sporting base growing up. But I certainly could have been at a better level than what I started at, I believe. But you're kind of dealt the cards you're dealt. But the first sort of like vertical jump numbers that I do have a number when I was like 15. I was able to touch the net for the first time. This was like before starting like jump training and before really going through puberty as well. And I was touching the net. I think it was like 8'6", 8'7", and this was at maybe like 5 foot. And then at 16, I'd grown like 2.5, 3 inches, and I was then touching 9'4". So I made like a lot of progress in 1 year. And then after, I think it was like less than a year, it was like 9 months or something, or 8 months, I then touched the rim. So I made a lot of progress quite quick. I think my vert went from in the 28 to 30 range to touching 34 on like a really good day with some adrenaline in the system, which is when I touched the rim. And then from there, my kind of seemed to go up like 2 inches each year. 2018, it was like 36 at my kind of like quote unquote prime. And then 2019 at dunk camp, I tested 38 as well, which was another 2 inches. And then I didn't really test officially higher than that, because I think like a big thing that stopped me from becoming a better dunker than I maybe could have was just like the training environment. It's something that my coaches actually spoke about, I think, recently in one of their podcasts that I was watching. And it's just kind of the idea that I didn't really have the environment that was conducive to becoming like a high level dunker. Maybe if I'd grown up in Florida when I was, 17, 16, I maybe could have made something of myself, or like more of myself at least. But I think it's just like the environment wasn't ideal. The only time that jumping felt like the best that I ever had was when I kind of transitioned to doing some high jump, which you'll see a little bit later on in the video. I did get my vert into, I estimate to be in the kind of 40-inch range, and I also have like a disadvantage. So I'm not only am I short, I also have very small feet, so that kind of detracts, because if you think about it, if your feet are longer, you're kind of getting essentially 3 inches without really doing anything extra. So if my feet were kind of like a more normal size, I'd have like an extra inch of vertical. If my feet were like relatively big, I would potentially have like a 2-inch advantage. But because my feet are only UK size 6, US size 7, I'm kind of like at a disadvantage just from that. So it's like, if I test 40, technically it could be 42 with a more, like a bigger shoe size. But I'm kind of like straying too far from the topic of the video, which is, I guess, like running. But I think it's important to go over my early beginnings, because I certainly think it helped out with developing me into certainly a better runner than what I kind of naturally was. Like, I was always like very small throughout my whole life. Essentially, I've always been very short. I was relatively good at like running, and like I think the acceleration side of running as well, I kind of excelled at that. But going up into high school, I was then, like little fish, big pond, that kind of thing. And all of a sudden there was like so many people that were like way better athletes than me, and I just thought, you know what, maybe I just don't have the genetics to be a great athlete. So I think I kind of like gravitated away from sports a bit more than I did when I was in primary school, simply because of that, because I kind of felt like I wasn't, you know, as good as what other people were, so I didn't feel there was any point in trying almost. And it's kind of like sad, I guess, to like think about it in a way, but that was just kind of like my mentality at that point in my kind of like sporting career. So I didn't really get into sports until I was like 15. Like I did, like growing up I did multi-sports. As I said, I was kind of pretty good at sprinting in primary school, but then in high school I wasn't really great. I think I was just like maturation wise, I was just behind my peers always, which was sort of my big struggle. And that kind of, you know, you can kind of see in the first clip with me running, you can see how like unathletic and slow I am. Like just in that, I potentially was like slower than 15 seconds, maybe it was like 15.5 seconds, but yeah, it was like very slow. One number I actually have, I don't have like an official 100 meter time from that time point, but I do have long jump numbers. So I specifically remember at 15, we were doing these like long jump trials to kind of like make it to the like final, and the final was essentially just like anyone that could jump over 3 meters 50 would advance to the final. So there was like, I think there was a solid like 25 of us that were in the final, maybe even 30 of us from my year. And I remember like I kept going. I think on my second jump I was like 346. I can't remember what the third jump was, I just remember the second jump was 346, and then I remember doing like another one and another one. I kept like going back around and like circling back to the back of the line to try and like beat my mark. And I think my teacher kind of felt bad for me that I was like so close, and he, you know, pitied me and was like, look, I'll just put you into the final, because he, you know, as I say, he felt bad. As I said, he kind of felt bad for me, and that's just kind of like a number I have from that time period, which is kind of like a wild number, because it's like now I can standing broad jump. I think my best from like 2 years ago was 311, so it's not like crazy far off what I was doing with like a full run up. So that just kind of gives you an insight into how unathletic I was. So I never really like ran any proper meets until 2022, which is when I really got into sprinting. The only two meets that are kind of notable were when I was finishing high school. So we had this like, I think it was a pentathlon, it was like 5 events. I may be like butchering that a little bit, but we did this pentathlon. I remember 100 meters was the first event of it, and I ran, and I was running quite well. Like at this point I'd done about a year and a half of training to jump higher, and I was definitely a lot more athletic for just doing that kind of jumping higher training that I'd done, which was essentially just like jumping. I'd done like a little bit of weights up to this point, but I got out really well, was winning the first 20 or 30 meters, and then I pulled both my quads simultaneously, and I had no idea what a muscle pull was, so I just kind of thought that that my quads were sore after running. I didn't put two and two together, and I think I just had like a lot of adrenaline in my system, and I just continued to do the rest of the events I did. After that it was like long jump. I long jumped, I think it was 4 meters 99 on 2 pulled quads. I then did javelin. I remember I just did a standing javelin throw, because I was like, my legs are kind of too sore to do a run up, so I was just like, we'll just do it from a standstill. And then I started the 800 meters, but I was in like too much agony at this point, and I had to like drop out after like 50 meters, I'm pretty sure. And then high jump was the last event, and it was the event I was like looking forward to the most, because, you know, I'd put in like a year and a half of like jump training, and I really wanted to see what I could do for high jump. And I ended up, I think it was 1 meter 60 I did, or potentially 1 meter 62, but I'm leaning more towards the 1 meter 60. And it was like a scissor kick flop that I did, so you'll see later in the video, I did like a 3-step scissor kick flop over 165. So this was like 2018, this was around about the time I was in sort of 36-inch vertical shape, and yeah, I did that jump. I was kind of surprised, and especially like looking back at it, like doing it with 2 pulled quads is kind of wild, but this was like full approach, you know, with some adrenaline. I then remember like after doing this, I had like work to go to at like 5 o'clock. It was like a 5 till 10 o'clock shift, and my legs were like so cooked. I remember like I had my lunch break, I like came back afterwards, I worked like 30 minutes, and then I asked my manager to like go home early because like my legs were just kind of so cooked by this point. And he was like, well, you've had your lunch break now, so you can't you have to like stay and finish the shift now. So I was like, damn. That's when I worked in McDonald's. I actually have a picture of me working in McDonald's when my uncle happened to come in. I'll maybe like throw it on screen right now because like why not. But yeah, that was kind of my early sort of sporting journey. I then obviously go across to dunk camp, and that's where I kind of like blow up on social media a little bit. I kind of make it to the Baller's Life Instagram page. On their like story, they post me for winning the low rim dunk contest. I dunked over like a table like lengthways. So like it was just inside the free throw line over a table, and that kind of is what I'm sort of like known for in the dunk community. I think even now like some people still kind of know me for that, but at the same time I was actually talking with one of my friends, Tom, and he's like, we're kind of achieving UNC status, and he was saying how like anyone, you know, past 2021, we don't really know them in the dunk community. I kind of think that's accurate. I feel like a lot of people past 2021 in the dunk community won't really know me, but sort of before then I was like, you know, kind of big for that, but not like massive, I guess. But that's kind of where I was at. I then sort of dunked off 2 feet this was like after dunk camp. I'd like pulled my groin going for so many attempts over the table, because I like pulled the table out and I missed my first attempt, and I think I did like a good 5 or 6, potentially even 7 attempts, and my like groin was absolutely cooked after that, and I had to take like 2 weeks off to like recover. I'd kind of like low-key pulled my groin, and I didn't really know what to do for rehab, so I was like, let's just like rest for 2 weeks. That was always my answer. Like when I pulled both my quads, I rested for like 3 weeks. I was like, when I pulled both of them as well, I was in agony. Like the next day, I legitimately couldn't walk. I had to like phone in sick to school for the next like 2 days. And then it was like my last day at school by the 3rd day, so I was like, right, I just have to kind of go in and grin and bear it, because I can't like, you know, skip out on like the last day of school. I mean, that's when everyone does skip, but I felt kind of bad because I'd skipped the 2 days prior, but I'm kind of like digressing too much. So then I get like a bunch of knee pain after dunk camp. Like I had knee pain before dunk camp, it kind of like ruined my prep. And that was round about the time that I sort of like wrote my first like periodized training program was for dunk camp in 2019. And I was like heavily inspired by like Clarence Kennedy and Jump Science, like their kind of methodologies with training. For Clarence, it was like the idea of like, you know, an athlete lifts without a belt, kind of don't have like knee sleeves when squatting, like a raw squat. So I did that. I like Jump Science's ideas of, you know, deep squatting, of like lifting, you know, heavy weights fast, doing these sort of things with intent. So I sort of followed that in the run up to dunk camp. Got a bit of knee pain. I then just like rested before dunk camp, because this was back when like isometrics and like this kind of training was starting to get more popular, but it was still kind of like under wraps a little bit. Like it wasn't really as known, but I feel like now like everyone kind of knows in the dunk community sort of how to deal with knee pain, because, you know, John, you know, the GOAT John, shout out John if you're watching this, he sort of like introduced that into the dunk community and sort of revolutionized the game essentially. So shout out to you, John. And yeah, where was I going with that? I was talking about knee pain. So yeah, I had knee pain in the run up to it. I didn't have like a great run up to the dunk camp, but yeah, still PR'd my vertical by 2 inches on like the 4th day after like jumping. Like the jump volume at dunk camp was kind of crazy. I was like jumping every day. First day I think I did like a solid 35 jumps. I then did like a few jumps. I think I did like 5 or 10 jumps on day 2, maybe like 5 jumps on day 3, and then day 4 I kind of just like sent it tested my vertical in the morning, did like the low rim dunk contest where my groin sort of exploded, which was sort of like unsurprising because I jumped really well on the 4th day, and yeah, I was like feeling in a good place considering my training had been very patchy. I also deadlifted 3 times body weight for the first time during this prep, so obviously like what I was doing was working to an extent. My squat numbers, I don't think I tested my squat, but I don't think they really improved. They maybe like, I suppose they probably slightly improved. I just didn't really test it. I should have tested it during that week when I was like feeling good, but I didn't end up doing that. So then, come back from dump camp, jumping well. I then get some more knee pain. That's when I kind of start talking to John a bit more, because John had always sort of spoken to me. He like knew me when I was at like 300 followers, when I was kind of like more low-key on Instagram with dunking, and he just kind of liked my technique because I'm a speed jumper. So he kind of was like, you have like a nice technique. He's like, you're gonna be one of the better jumpers in the dunk community because you got a good technique. And from there I kind of like periodically talked to him, and I really respected his content. I mean, I still do really respect his content. And so from there in 2019, I was then like talking to him, and I was like, look, if I can't heal my knee pain myself, because I kind of knew like some of the things, but not like all of the things I know now. So I knew like some of the things, and I said to John, I was like, if I, heal my own knee pain, I'm just going to keep training myself. But if I can't, then I'll, go to you for coaching. So I kind of like made that agreement with John. And then I healed my knee pain. It got better. Then come early 2020, it was like April time, I start to like jump a lot more. This was like a common occurrence, was the weather would get nice out. My jump volume would like spike up because I can jump outside all of a sudden more often, and then knee pain just kind of, comes into the chat. And yeah, that was a pretty consistent thing. But I then, at that point, John kind of like reached out to me. He was like, because I like posted something on my story, and then he like reached out, and then I kind of joined THP, and then the rest is, history. I've been training with them. It'll be 5 years come April this year, which is kind of like wild to say. It's honestly like crazy that it was 5 years ago that I joined THP, like thinking about it now. I think it was the 12th of April. But yeah, I joined them, and like before this I'd started like my dunk camp prep at the start of 2020. I started to add like sprints in my training because I'd always liked sprinting in my training. I just never really had, I guess like I didn't prioritize it enough. I don't think it was necessarily that I didn't have access to facilities. I think to an extent maybe it was that, especially kind of like 2018, 2019 when I was like back home. Certainly because like indoor tracks during the winter, but I did train some sprints during the winter, and it wasn't really too much of a facilities issue. But I think at the same time it was kind of like a convenience thing. Like I didn't program sprints because it's like a lot to go and sprint and then like go to the weight room. I didn't really do like double sessions. But come 2020 I decided to like really lock in with training, I think inspired by dunk camp. I wanted to kind of like execute the best training plan that I'd ever done, which ended up getting me injured, unsurprisingly. And I got injured twice. So I got knee pain. I also like pulled a hamstring this was when I was like jumping, but I think it was because of the sprints that I did like earlier in the week, and just the intensities were ramped up too fast. But early on in 2020 it was like cold, so I wasn't really sprinting great in the cold. But then it started to get a bit nicer come March. Started to add more sprints in. I think like naturally at that point I was definitely in sort of the 12.5 to 12 flat range. Like I feel like if I'd ran in a meet I would have got a time in that range. I don't really think it would have been quicker. I think especially because my speed endurance would have been my biggest sort of problem. So say past like 40-50 meters I'm gonna start to really like die and like phase out of a race. So I feel like that's potentially where I was kind of at that time. And then I joined THP, and I think that kept me more accountable with like doing the sprints, because John programmed sprints, and it was like a lifetime goal for me to run under 11 seconds in the 100 meters. So I was then sprinting like a lot more often. At the start of lockdown, it was like, you know, on grass, on like this, I went to this like gravel field at one point that was like the worst surface to sprint on, but I just kind of sprinted in loads of different locations at this point, just to like get the work done, and then I would come back, lift weights or jump or something, and then, you know, rinse and repeat essentially. And I made really good progress like after like 1 month of doing these like sprints more intensely, because John programmed a lot more sprint than what I was programming myself. So I definitely benefited from doing this sprint work, from having this volume. And as you see, after like a month, I don't think it was even a month, it was like after like 2 or 3 weeks, I was kind of like, you know, noticeably better when I spiked up on the track again. But a lot of the time was spent like sprinting in my driveway as well early on, because it's just like lockdown regulations. I wasn't really able to like go to tracks to train. Then eventually I was able to get back to tracks come sort of like June, July time, start to do more track sessions, but I was still kind of like interspersing training on my like driveway or on grass, because it was like a convenience thing. I think like you're driving to a track for 10 minutes, then driving back, that's like, you know, 20-25 minutes sort of round trip. So you can kind of save that time if you like drive down to the park for, I don't know, like it takes like a 4-minute drive to the park. So it sometimes just made more sense to sprint like close to home. So that was really, it was like a convenience thing. And then I ended up getting like a lot of injuries around about this time. I think my biggest problem with that was sort of the nutrition side of things. Like my training had gotten like, you know, noticeably more intense. Like I could feel and like I could like see the volume of work that I was doing was like a good bit more. I don't think it was necessarily that I couldn't handle it. I guess to an extent you probably could argue that I couldn't, and that's why I got injured. But I do think it's, you know, like injury is one thing that's like multifaceted. So it's not like any given thing is going to like cause you to get injured. It's always going to be, you know, multiple things that will cause an injury. So there's like a nutrition component. Obviously, you know, if you're not eating enough, you're not then recovering enough. Like recovery is sort of like the main thing, but there's like loads of things that underpin recovery. There's like stress management, there's all sorts of things. And I think at that time it was mainly just like I wasn't really eating enough, I wasn't getting the right things in after workouts, and I think that was my biggest thing, and that was causing me to not be recovered enough for my next session. Because I think now obviously I've like proved that I can sustain these kind of volumes and not get injured. It was just sort of like at that point I wasn't really thinking. I think it was like, you know, I'm not trying to bash the guys at THP, but it was like a lack of sort of guidance. And I think, you know, partly that's my fault. I was very sort of reluctant to contact John a lot. I felt like I was kind of a burden. I didn't want to be, you know, taking away from his like services that he like offers others. And I also sort of like the idea of like trying to train myself more and like just do the work that John sends me and like learn the stuff on my own, learn how to kind of lift with intent, learn how to do all of these things on my own. Because I felt like when I joined THP, it was one thing that I didn't want to happen was to sort of be more lazy and laid back. I still wanted to like learn a lot, and I still think I have done that, which I guess kind of like ticks off that goal of like when joining THP. So yeah, then I got to a point where I had like a really bad hamstring injury. I was like not sprinting for like 2 or 3 weeks, and then after that I kind of get back into sprinting, start to run better times. I think what helped getting back into sprinting after the injury was that I was running a lot of like wind assisted reps, and it was like I was getting that overspeed when I was coming back, so that was like getting me into shape faster. And then I finished off my last sort of like nice weather training cycle. So this was like the end of September, and I ran, I think it was a 4:12 or 4:14, which was a 3:95 on the free lap from the touchpad. So, you know, first movement, not really, you know, like a very good time. Like I went from like 4:42 on a windy day in a pair of trainers to running 4.12 by the end of, September. So this was like end of March to end of September, so like six-ish months to make that kind of progress is very, very good. I didn't really do much max velocity at this point because I always seem to just get injured, so I wasn't really able to do that. Then moving on, training was going great, everything was going good, then get another hamstring injury. This is like the 4th or 5th one of the year, and at that point, this is like during the winter, so when I get back into sprinting, it's then like too cold to really get like good quality reps. If any of you have ever ran in the cold before, I think you'll all have experienced sort of like a speed decline when you run in the cold, and that sort of negatively impacted like the motor patterns that I'd sort of built up. So I was now patterning in slower running, because I think like a big thing with sprinting is like getting intense outputs relatively often. I don't think you have to have like every session like super max effort, but you need to be getting like high intensity outputs as often as possible, because if not, you're just going to pattern in slower running, especially if you're pushing max effort and you're not able to because of some external factor like cold weather. So that's where I was at. 2021, starting to kind of like build back up, the weather's getting nicer, then get a really bad hamstring injury. It takes 6 months to really come back from. It took 6 months in total to get back to the sort of times that I was running prior to injury. So it was a very like mentally draining and mentally tough injury, because it was just like, it was sort of unexpected, and like looking back at it, it was that I was just kind of like increasing the intensity and volume like each week, and something was gonna give, and this was like my fault because I was like adding stuff into training that I shouldn't have been adding in, and that's where the issue happened. So yeah, 6 months to get back. I ended up taking like a full month off sprinting at one point, because I just like mentally just was struggling with like pushing, because there was like a tight sensation after this injury. It was like a grade 2 hamstring pull, and there was just this like tightness that just seemed to like linger around for far too long. So just took a long time to sort, but then I was kind of at like all-time levels. Come like December 2021, I was feeling really good. I wanted to do like a 60 meter meet during like the second week of January in 2022, but I wasn't able to enter in because the meet was like sold out, so I had to just kind of like knock that on the head. I then didn't think I was gonna compete for like the whole season. I thought I'd maybe do like a high jump meet, and then I would go and do like, I don't know, maybe like 100 outdoors, or I thought I was going to focus more on high jump certainly, but then I got this like email from my university. They just like asked if any athletes want to go and compete at the Scottish Student Championship, so I kind of like signed up for that. And at this time I'd been doing like a lot of strength training. I wasn't really in the right sort of training cycle to, I guess, like to perform well, or at least I thought. Like a week out I was running really slow. I'd only really ran like sled reps in training with like 10% body mass, so I didn't feel like I was in the best shape for it, so I guess I just had like, no expectations going in. And it proved to be really good, because I ran 7:26 in the heats, 7:15 in the semi-final, and then managed to just get third in the final with a 7.05. And these times were all without blocks in a pair of like Superfly Elite 2s. And yeah, I then kind of at that point realised I was like relatively good at sprinting. It took me like so long to kind of realise, but at that point I was like, right, I need to kind of compete outdoors. So outdoors comes round. I'm kind of like battling a little groin injury, but I'm managing to kind of like work around it and still get my sprint work in. It just seems to be this like reoccurring tightness that comes around at the end of each session. So I opened my season with this like 11:53. It was into a headwind. There was no wind index, but the next like few races were all headwinds. And I was like battling this injury. I was not really feeling 100%. so I then have to kind of go into like a mini rehab cycle, which takes like 2 weeks. Then compete on like the third week, where I run 11:22. So like a big sizable PR, was very happy with that. But I then stood on glass and kind of like messed up the second race, where I believe I probably would have went like 11, I think I would have went like 11:1 something, like 11:15 maybe. But obviously, you know, I ran slower because I stood on glass, because I'm kind of stupid. And yeah, then I'm getting ready for my next meet. I was supposed to compete a bit earlier, but I had this like hamstring tightness, you know, earlier in the week. I think my training was just like too intense at this point, and that was my sort of big problem. And I then end up running sort of the next week during Wednesday. The meet was like cancelled on the Friday anyway, so it's like there wasn't really a chance for me to go and run, I guess, regardless. Then go and run down at this meet that's, I think it was like the night of 100 meter PBs, and first race was like 11:24 into a -1.2, or a -1 I think, and you know, quite slow, but I'm feeling good. I like won the race as well. It was my first ever race win, feeling really good. I then run in the next race, run 11.02 with plus or -0.4 wind. So like at that point I kind of know sub 11 is happening. It's just kind of a case of like when, not if. I then have like my best training session ever like 2 weeks after that. Like if I'd competed on that day, I believe I would have went like 10.8 or something like that, like 10.85 or something, with like my form how it was back then. Like my form was like honestly shocking at that point. Then I have like, so I'm still really focused on like jump training throughout all of this, because like the goal with sprints is just to improve my jumping. So I have like dunk camp 2022 that I'm going to, so I then kind of am focusing more on that than sprinting. I go there, I think I test like a 0.5 inch lifetime PR on like touch, which was like 10 foot 5.5. And you know, at that point I'm more kind of focused on sprinting like subconsciously, but I still, you know, enjoy jumping. I still wanted to kind of focus on jumping. I kind of come back from dunk camp and I am a lot slower, certainly. I think the big issue was just that I had detrained a little bit. I wasn't really doing as much max velocity work. I think I took sort of a week off of that, and then that obviously had like a negative impact. I then come back to the UK. The day after I came back, I wasn't even in the UK for 24 hours at this point. I ran an 11:10 with a plus 1.6. It was honestly like the best conditions though. Like it was a beautiful sunny day, like 24, 25 degrees, like perfect sprinting weather. But I was just kind of not really in great shape. Like I had to sort of like build my shape back up, not completely from scratch, but like, you know, from where it was certainly. So I then run another meet 10 days later. I ran 11:24 into a minus, I think it was -1.2 this time. And then I go and run a 200, which was like 23:46 into a -1.6. And that was just like, honestly, like the worst meet like of my life. I arrived like, I had like 1 hour to sign on, and I didn't get all my warm-ups done. I didn't even get any warm-up blocks. I was like running to the start line to make it because I didn't realise that I would be like in the first heat, and it was just not ideal. So I then was like straight back into training. I was like, I've not really hit intensities that kind of warrant me to take it like easy. I can just kind of like really load up and go hard like straight after the meet. So did some hills, did my usual training. I then taper off and managed to run, you know, a 10.91 plus 3.8 and then 10.92 plus 0.6. So I run these times, like I was working the 2 days, so I was working like, I think it was Friday, Saturday, and then the meet was on Sunday. So I then like drove down to Birmingham, which was like a 6-hour journey because of traffic, and then I think I got like 3 or 4 hours sleep. But I just like woke up and I just felt really good. I felt like I was gonna run fast. Like I don't think I thought I was gonna run fast, but I just kind of felt good. And I feel like any time that I wake up before a meet and I feel good, it's just like a very good sign. So that was kind of where I was at. That was kind of the journey. I hope this kind of explains things. I hope people can take things away from this. I believe in terms of like what I've gained from sprinting, it's not just like, oh, I've like improved my performance. I've also kind of like went through like a personal journey as well. You know, from a young age, I wasn't very confident. I didn't have a lot of self-esteem. I didn't really believe in myself. And I think like going through this journey, I've got more belief in myself. I'm a lot more confident in like who I am as a person. So it's kind of like more than just, you know, doing, you know, like running under 11 seconds. It's like more than that. It's like a whole journey that's like holistic. And yeah, I think it's very valuable. I think even if it's like not sprinting that you do, even if you're doing a different domain, I believe it's valuable to like push as hard as you can to try and achieve what you can, and to not really worry about like others. Like, I know I'm not the best sprinter on the planet. I know I probably never will be the best sprinter on the planet, and to me that's alright, because it's like a personal journey. I'm seeing what, you know, the best version of myself can do on the track when it's just like me versus the track. So with that said, I hope everyone enjoyed the video. I hope that you can take some things away. Hopefully you know, don't get as injured as I did, especially at the start. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video and stick around, because I'm planning to run faster this year. 10.6 is coming.